We are going to look at a key element of leadership, feedback. Feedback changes lives because it creates the opening for greater integrity in our most important relationships. Feedback builds trust, and trust builds everything else in today's workplace. Delivered in the present, feedback is information about past behavior to influence future behavior. Feedback is fundamental in helping individuals or teams in your workplace to reach their objectives. It also allows your people to work with others in achieving that which they could not achieve alone. And most importantly, in these times of constant change, effective feedback is essential for maintaining consistent performance. Feedback not effectively given can reduce the receiver's self-confidence, lower their motivation, cause so many feelings of anger, as well as increasing the tendency to attempt to resolve interpersonal conflicts through head-on confrontation, rather than through compromise or collaboration. While feedback is seldom easy, you can learn to give effective feedback. To be effective, you must understand what is going on during the process when feedback is being delivered and received. You also need to develop a strategy for being secure enough to tolerate the unpredictability of feedback. With feedback, you don't have to be perfect to give good feedback, and that's very important to realize. Feedback, according to the authors of What Did You Say? The Art of Giving and Receiving Feedback, explain that feedback is an interactive process, a rapid-fire and complex flow of information gathering, internal processing, and response, often with both parties being givers and receivers at the same moment. Feedback between people really is a system. Many factors enter into the system and affect the quality of it. Effective feedback must be heard and understood by the receiver to be effective. It has to be devised and delivered so that the relationship between you and the receiver stay intact and future interactions are possible. It provides information that can be used, and it's not a criticism, because criticism is evaluative, where descriptive is saying what's actually going on and begins to start suggesting what can be done to correct a situation. Positive feedback between people involves many critical factors. You are required to explicitly or implicitly share your goals from the process. All parties involved in the process must monitor the climate to reduce resistance. Any conflict that arises during the process must be addressed to prevent the feedback process from being derailed. You must also allow time for people to digest and integrate the information you share with them, with an opportunity for them to return later for clarification. Finally, directness and openness are vital. Communication is at the core process of giving and receiving feedback. It begins with the intake. The receiver selects what information will be received. The receiver interprets the message based partly on information present in the message and itself, and partly on information based on their own experience. Receivers assign significance and decide whether the effect is good or bad. Acceptance, when the receiver, usually unconsciously, decides it's okay for them to feel the way they are feeling about the feedback. Finally, based on the previous 4 steps, the 5th step is when the receiver starts to think of possible responses, often unconsciously. There are a number of factors that can affect the feedback process. Some are the context of the conversation, the party's priorities, our own self-perception, and affiliated needs such as approval and belonging. Other factors that could take priority over the substance of the message and might reflect the power imposed by you as a sender, the emotional power of your message, and your personal style. You should give feedback in a non-threatening environment, because the lessons you offer might be apparent and concrete to the receiver, and your feedback should be dramatically received. Also, humor is another key element, and it allows for you to explore some alternatives. Humor during the process allows you to introduce new materials in a safe way. Giving positive feedback is very easy. Giving negative feedback is a lot more difficult. 3 steps in giving effective negative feedback are setting the stage, discussing the negative behavior, and 3, developing a plan of action. In setting the stage, you first of all don't want to vent. Venting with a string of criticism seldom produces improved behavior. In fact, it usually creates resentment and passive resistance. You also want to be timely. Negative feedback should be given as soon as possible after the event. If you see an employee being rude to a customer, don't wait until their annual performance to tell them. Tell them as soon as it happened and in the right setting. Don't email negative feedback. People who avoid confrontation are often tempted to use email as a vehicle for negative feedback. Don't do that. Find a private place. No one wants to receive negative feedback in front of others. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but that should be a last resort. Take a meeting in your office, call a person to a vacant conference room, step into the lunchroom, whatever. Wherever they can talk with them privately as you can. Be calm. Don't yell, scream, or raise your voice. The other person will become defensive if you do, and they won't hear what you're trying to tell them. Don't stockpile negative feedback. Changes in behavior are more easily achieved when negative behavior is administered in small doses. When managers stockpile problems, wait for the right moment, employees can easily become overwhelmed. Be willing to accept feedback yourself. If you truly believe that negative feedback can improve performance, then you should be willing to accept it as well as provide it. In fact, few things are more valuable to a manager than honest feedback from your employees. That kind of feedback should be treasured rather than discouraged or ignored. Get over it. After you've given the negative feedback and agreed on a resolution, move on with the job. Don't harbor ill will towards the employee because they made a mistake. Also, don't hover over them out of fear that they will make another mistake. Monitor their performance as you do all other employees. The second stage is discussing the negative behavior. And that starts with an honest compliment. Compliments start a feedback session on the right footing. Effective feedback focuses on the positive while identifying areas for further growth and better outcomes. Focus on the actions, not on the person. You create an immediate barrier when you criticize the person. Focus instead on what you want to change. Focus on their performance. Be specific. It does no good to tell somebody you have a bad attitude. You need to identify specific actions the person took or specific things they said if you want them to understand. Uncover the root problem. You can give better feedback if you understand how the other person perceives the original situation. Asking questions such as, why do you approach this situation in this way? Or what was your thought process? Not only provides your perspective, but it can lead to other people to discover their own solutions and their own insights. Ask questions that derive self-evaluation. Much of the time, people know when they have problems and may even have a good idea about how to improve them. Asking questions such as, how can we have done this better, and what do you think how we can improve, involves the other person in building a shared plan. Finally, listen before you speak. Most people can't learn unless they first feel they are being heard out. Effective feedback means paying attention and giving high-quality feedback from an empathetic place. Stepping into the other person's shoes, appreciating his or her experiences, and helping them move to the person into a learning mode are essential. The third and final step is a plan of action, and that should be done before leaving the meeting. What you want to do is coach the person on the kind of behaviors you would like to see. Negative feedback is useless unless a model on how to do better is given. But simply telling the other person what to do or how to do it is usually a waste of time. Stop talking. After you've told the person what specific recent actions were inappropriate and why, stop talking. Give the person a chance to respond or refute your statements. Listen to what they have to say. Define positive steps. Agree on the future performance. If there are specific things the employee needs to do, start doing them, or needs to stop doing, be sure they are clearly identified. If there is something you need to do, perhaps additional training for the employee, agree on what that will be. Finally, reaffirm your faith in the person. Here's where you tell them that you still have faith in them as a person and their abilities. It's just that their performance you want to change. So, in summary, there's some important lessons to learn about feedback. One, it has to be shaped so the receiver can understand it. It must also be presented openly and directly with goals of the feedback process shared explicitly and implicitly. Conflicts that arise during the process must be addressed, and the receiver has to be given time to digest the message and be able to return later for clarification. Feedback, most importantly, must be concrete and given in a non-threatening environment.